Greetings and welcome to the channel. Now today it is another folktale day, and the story goes back to the medieval times and is about food, about a cake. So relax and enjoy this video. So a long time ago, in those medieval times, the times of the Anglo-Saxons, the times of the Vikings, and later on the Anglo-Normans, there lived a woman. She was a mother. She had 9 children. I'm sure you agree that's a lot of children to have. And in those days, people had large families. For it was essential. You needed your children to work on your land, to work around your longhouse. And from a young age, you'll be taught the skills and the skills of crafting. Whether as a boy you'll be learning to make chainmail, whether you be learning to manage your animals, the sheep and the goats. You'll be busy. Not like today when children have too much time on their hands. And our story revolves around the mother. She had a nice long house. Her husband was a farmer. He had a bit of land. They weren't poor. His children were in fact quite spoilt by fine foods and even good education, which in those times was quite a rare thing, until Canute brought about education to the world, which is another story indeed. Now our mother, she had a nice oven made from clay in an outbuilding where the building had no walls, just posts. But the clay oven was protected by a ceiling, by a roof. And you may be saying, well, Braggy, what is a clay oven? What does it look like? Well, the first thing you do, and this is what they did, is they dug a round pit about a foot deep with a flat bottom. The men may have got some stones from a river or a stream and laid it on the bottom before getting a lot of clay. They'll get some clay, and they'll have some willow branches going along to give it some sturdiness as well. And then they'll lay the clay on top and build a base. And then they'll get some more willow or hazel and bend them over in a U shape and form a frame and make a door. And then they'll get the clay and cover it in the willow. Somebody would have to go inside the oven to put the clay on the inside, and that was often done by a child, because the oven door would only be a foot or 2 in diameter depending on the size of the oven. And they would cover the willow or the hazel with clay. And then, very carefully, they would let the clay dry and got to the point where they'll make a little fire inside. Of course at the top would be a hole, a little chimney for the smoke to escape. Sometimes they did and sometimes they didn't. This is very debatable. But this is what she got. She had a clay oven. It was ideal for making cake. And it was ideal for baking bread. And of course in those times, in the times of the medieval peasants and the Saxons and the Vikings, bread was a very important source of food. And you'll be making bread every day. And this is what she's been doing. As always, they have a routine. They get up when the sun rises, or just before. They have their breakfast, maybe some cheese with bread, maybe a little bit of cut cold meat with it if you're lucky. Not like today, not like lots of cereals we had. Maybe they would have porridge. Porridge was one of those sustainable foods that goes back a long way in time. But on this occasion, she's already made some bread that morning. She got the oven warm, she put the dough in, and the dough came out as a lovely piece of bread. But then during lunchtime, she wanted to make some cakes. And of course in those times we collected berries and we knew all the herbs and the ingredients to put in a cake. And of course they also had one thing which we take for granted these days, which is honey. Because honey was the only source of sweetness. Not like today when everything's full of sugar and sugar's not good for you. They had honey. And most farmers would have a beehive or two, or would go to your neighbour who had some beehives. But having beehives and having bees on your little land was so important, because honey was, as I say, the only source of sweetness. And so she got a wooden bowl and was mixing some flour with some wheat. She put some dried berries in there, and she made a nice loaf of cake. And she put it in a wooden container, or maybe in this case a clay container, because putting a wooden container in the oven is not the wisest of things. You could burn it if you're not careful. So in this case you had a nice clay container, a clay pot, and she put the cake mixture in. Of course you have to get some fat and put it on the outside of, on the inside of the container, like we do in the modern world to bake your cake. And she put the cake in. The oven was still warm from the fire she lit early in the morning, and the cake rose up and turned out to be this most marvellous looking tasty cake. I love a fruit loaf, and fruit cake is one of my favourite. Oh, get a slice, put a bit of butter on it and a cup of tea, and you're laughing. But of course in those days you didn't have tea, but you may have herbal drinks. You would have drinks from berries and mead and wine and water that's been boiled. And so she made a nice big cake, and she took the cake into the longhouse and put it on the table. But her children were very impatient. They wanted to eat the cake. Oh, mother, let us eat the cake now. We're so hungry, please, please. And all 9 of them were gathering around and bothering her, asking to eat cake. But she said, oh, you must wait until it cools down, for the cake is too warm at the moment and has just come out the oven, children. And again they kept on bothering her. Oh, please, mother, let us eat the cake. Let us give her a slice now. We're hungry. For her children were spoiled. This is often in the modern world that happens as well. Don't spoil your children, is what I'm saying. And so there they were, a big table made from oak, and the cake was on top. She managed to get the cake out in one piece out of the clay pot, and she put it on a nice bit of linen cloth to cool down. But the cake had its own idea. You thought, oh, being ate by children. The cake was not happy, and the cake thought, I'm not going to have that. I've just been born. This is my first day on earth. I don't want to be ate by some horrible children. And so the cake jumped up and landed on the floor of the building, the longhouse, and rolled out the building. And luckily for the cake, they lived on a slope, and the cake ran off, rolling and rolling down the hill, and was never seen again. Oh yes, and this is indeed the story of the cake that got away. And I don't know the origin of this story. I don't know whether it's English, I don't know whether it's Germanic in origin, but I certainly know it's a wonderful tale. And I love cake, and it does remind me of King Alfred when he had escaped from the Vikings, dressed as a very poor peasant in browns and beigey colours to make himself look poor and not be recognised as the King of Wessex, when he came to a woman who was making some oat cakes, probably. And I love an oat cake. An oat cake is very much like a pancake, and they're yummy with bacon or cheese. And so the old woman welcomed King Alfred, not knowing who he was, into her longhouse, and says, I'm baking some cakes outside on my fire, on my skillet. And a skillet is basically a flat frying pan. And he said, I need a hand, I need to get some water. And so King Alfred said, oh, I'll help if you give me some cake to eat, because I'm hungry. I'm on the march, I'm trying to get to somewhere. And she said, okay, if you look after the cakes, I will feed you and give you some water. And King Alfred was very pleased at that. But of course, King Alfred had a lot of problems. He sat round the fire with the skillet with the cakes baking and cooking away, but he was thinking about his kingdom while stroking his beard. He was thinking about the Vikings and thinking of how he could beat them in battle. And he forgot about the cakes, and those cakes were all burnt. And of course that is the most famous story. The woman came back and scolded him. "Oi, what you been doing? You've not been looking after my cakes, you burnt them." And that is one of the most famous stories in English history about cakes. It makes you think whether it happened. I think it did. I'm sure King Alfred was a wonderful king and a great ruler and a great tactician, but he was rubbish at baking cakes. But of course, being a king, he would never have to bake cakes as a king. He'd have servants to do all that for him. So he probably didn't know how to. But there's a moral in that story of when you're baking something, always keep an eye on it. I've done this in my time. There I am, there's Braggy. I get up, I think, oh, I could just eat a bacon sandwich. I put some bacon in my frying pan, or in the modern world I put it in my air fryer. And I go away and I come back and my bacon's all burnt on black and unusable and unedible. I've done that a few times, even to sausages. So the moral of the story when it comes to King Alfred is always keep an eye on what you're baking, because the last thing you want is burnt oat cakes. Now if you're new to the channel, please consider subscribing. Only 66% of you are not subscribed at the moment. 34% are, and 66% are not subscribed to the channel. YouTube is free to join and our channel is free to watch. We don't have a membership page where we charge you to watch our videos. I don't really believe in that for now. So do consider subscribing and do leave us a comment. And until we meet again, I'm going to get my axe out because I've heard some Saxons are on the loose. And I quite fancy some Saxon cake. You never know, they might be carrying some. Goodbye. Ah, bloody brambles.